Welcome back. Episode 1 left Major Anderson's flag above Fort Sumter, while Confederate batteries circled Charleston Harbor and Lincoln's Cabinet Wade resupply. Episode 2 opens with the bombardment itself, the flash that turned crisis into war, the surrender, and the political earthquake that followed across both sections. In the dark before first light, aides carried ultimatums, signal guns answered. At about 4:30 in the morning, a mortar shell arced towards Sumter's walls, the opening shot of a Civil War Americans had debated, delayed, and denied for years. Harbor windows glowed, families climbed rooftops to watch history ignite. Confederate batteries hurled shot and shell for 34 hours. Sumter's brickwork splintered, wooden barracks caught fire, smoke blinded gunners. Anderson's men replied until powder ran low and flames threatened the magazine. Engineering textbooks had not prepared officers for this new pace of destruction. On April 14th, Anderson capitulated with honors of war. He marched his small command out under folded colors. Charleston cheered what it called sovereignty defended. In northern cities, editors called the attack on a federal fort treason dressed as valor. The same hours produced opposite moral verdicts. News raced along wires faster than steamers. Mass meetings filled armories and churches. Young men signed lists. Women sewed flannel shirts and debated politics in parlors once reserved for gentler talk. Patriotism, fear, and curiosity braided into a single public mood, uncertain yet urgent. On April 15th, President Lincoln called forth 75,000 state militia for 90 days to suppress combinations too powerful for ordinary courts. He framed the duty as law enforcement, not revolution, yet the scale of the order told every reader that the old Union could not be patched quietly. Lincoln's call split the Upper South. Virginia's convention had hesitated. Now many delegates argued coercion justified departure. Richmond chose the Confederacy. The old federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry became a prize. Robert E. Lee offered Union high command, resigned rather than draw sword against Virginia. One by one, more slave states crossed the line: Arkansas, North Carolina, Tennessee, each with its own debates, votes, and minority Unionists who refused to celebrate. The Confederacy gained manpower, factories, and railroads it desperately needed. The Union lost the illusion that war would remain a brief coastal affair. The Confederate Congress moved the seat of government to Richmond, pinning the new nation beside Washington on the map. Capitals 100 miles apart made escalation thinkable. Armies could march toward each other's nerve centers along the Potomac corridor. Maryland's loyalty hung by a thread. Baltimore crowds attacked Massachusetts troops. Federal authorities arrested legislators. Lincoln suspended habeas corpus along vital rail lines. Keeping Washington supplied meant policing a slave state that never seceded, a preview of how occupation would blur law and necessity. Kentucky tried to stand between armies, forbidding both sides from bases. Neutrality proved a diary entry, not a fortress. Recruiters slipped across rivers. Governors traded telegrams with presidents. By autumn, both flags recruited openly on Kentucky soil. Missouri's Unionist governor and secessionist militias fought for arsenals and headlines. Camp Jackson's capture in St. Louis bloodied streets. Guerrilla shadows lengthened in the countryside. A border state could be officially Union, while neighborhoods chose sides with muskets. Both armies imagined short wars. Lincoln's first volunteers enlisted for 90 days. Confederates stitched gray from mill dye lots that faded in rain. Drill fields mixed college boys, immigrants and farmhands learning which end of a musket felt heavier after an hour in July sun. General-in-Chief Winfield Scott proposed a long blockade and river squeeze, the so-called Anaconda Plan. Critics jeered at its patience. Later campaigns borrowed its logic anyway. Geography, not oratory, would decide whether cotton could escape to pay for rifles. The Union Navy declared a blockade of Confederate ports, legally delicate, practically leaky at first. Swift blockade runners and foreign merchants tested rules. Diplomats in London and Paris watched for chances to recognize Southern independence. In July, Union Brigadier General Irvin McDowell marched Green volunteers toward the railroad junction at Manassas. Confederates under P. G. T. Beauregard and Joseph E. Johnston concentrated along Bull Run. Picnickers from Washington rode out, expecting a theatrical victory. Sunday, July 21st. Delays, misread maps, and couriers who never found the right brigade. Attacks surged up Matthews Hill and Henry Hill. Lines bent, rallied, and broke. Artillery tore gaps infantry tried to close. Smoke and noise erased neat battle diagrams. Confederate reinforcements shuttled by rail, the first large-scale wartime movement many observers had seen. Fresh troops plugged holes. Union assaults lost momentum on Henry Hill. Victory, like defeat, often arrived on schedule slips and cinder. As afternoon collapsed into rout, soldiers and civilians mixed on the roads to Alexandria and the capital. Discarded haversacks, broken wagons, and rumor outran fact. A nation that expected one battle to decide the season learned otherwise in dust and tears. Casualty lists stunned editors. Neither army had yet built field hospitals worthy of the name. Amputations by lantern light began a grim education. Bull Run was small beside later battles, yet large enough to kill the fantasy of a 90-day war. Congress moved toward 3-year regiments. States raised new banners. The president studied generals the way he once studied circuit cases, slowly, skeptically, replacing hope with administration. While Manassas shocked the East, George McClellan's name rose after small victories in Western Virginia. He looked organized on paper. Lincoln, hungry for competence, would soon call him East. Personality in politics would matter as much as maps. Enslaved people fled to Union lines. Commanders improvised policy, sometimes returning them, sometimes labeling them contraband of war. The legal fiction cracked, the moral fact pressed through. Emancipation was not yet doctrine, but the army had become an accidental sanctuary. British mills hungered for fiber. Lawyers parsed belligerent rights and neutrality. The Trent Affair later would nearly snap Atlantic peace. In 1861, caution still ruled. Confederate diplomacy needed recognition. Union diplomacy needed patience. Treasury Secretary Salmon P. Chase faced borrowing on faith. The Confederacy bet on cotton-backed bonds sold abroad. Inflation's ghost watched both capitals. Modern wars, Americans discovered, devoured arithmetic as hungrily as gunpowder. Sermons framed invasion and duty in rival tongues. Northern pulpits hailed preservation. Southern pulpits hailed defense of hearth. The same Bible verses marched in both directions, evidence that shared text did not guarantee shared nation. Ladies' aid societies rolled bandages. Plantation mistresses managed labor as men left. Nurses pushed against prejudice to enter hospitals. Enslaved women calculated risk at kitchen doors. Gendered roles bent. They did not break evenly. We began with Sumter's flash and followed the shock through new states, border knives, and Bull Run's muddy lesson. The armies still stand at the threshold of long campaigns, ironclads, and emancipation. Subjects Episode 3 will carry on to bloodier fields and harder law. Next time we trace McClellan's peninsular reach toward Richmond, naval ironclads at Hampton Roads, and the hardening of war policy when quick victories refuse to arrive. Save the playlist. This story only deepens from here. If Sumter and Bull Run moved you, read the letters soldiers mailed before they learned which cliches would fail them. Primary sources reward patience. We will see you in the trenches of a longer war. French-inspired baggy trousers and fezzes appeared in both armies, as regiments sought swagger and recruiters sought eyes. Fashion met mortality on drill fields. Hardee's and other manuals turned farmers into ranks. Sergeants counted cadence until blisters taught discipline better than pages. Measles and dysentery killed men who never saw an enemy. Surgeons learned sanitation by tragedy. Civilian traders followed armies selling soap, whiskey, and dubious cures. Soldiers wrote home about coins vanishing fast. Families studied envelopes for handwriting. Editors reprinted stirring passages. Some lies protected mothers from truth. Tintypes and carts de visite froze boys in awkward brass buttons, images that would outlive many subjects. Schedulers competed with generals. Missed connections turned victories into anecdotes. Publishers sold hurried battle maps. Errors misled voters who thought they understood fronts. Paddle wheels carried troops and horses. Snipers learned range from bluffs. The Great Stone Fort at Hampton Roads stayed federal, an anchor for blockade and future peninsula operations. Amphibious landings seized Outer Banks forts, small on the map, large for closing sounds to blockade runners. Medical directors argued over two-wheeled versus four-wheeled rigs. Wounded men felt the difference in jolts. Bugle calls cut through smoke. Drummers younger than their instruments kept tempo for death. Quartermasters scoured counties. Mounts arrived lame. Raiders learned to steal remounts. Bridging rivers became a specialty. Pontoons waited in yards like folded promises. Thaddeus Lowe and others pitched aerial reconnaissance. Tethered silk swayed over skeptic generals. Signal Corps officers waved messages hill to hill. Codes leaked. Fog ruined plans. Reporters telegraphed adjectives. Editors shaped public patience with commas and exclamation. Appointed officers with votes but little experience irritated West Pointers, who believed merit wore gray or blue by diploma. Mess hall memories met across sites. Some refused enemy fire on friends, others did not. Gunners adjusted elevation by trial. Bursting shells taught new respect for Napoleon field pieces. Many batteries still hurled round shot. Infantry rifles stretched skirmish ranges. Tactics lagged technology. Most casualties came from lead, yet the gleam of steel on a hill could break nerves faster than balls. Light companies learned to use fence rows. Officers who ignored cover paid in company roles. Men whispered in dark fields. Accidental shots triggered volleys. Fear wrote many after-action reports. Parole and cartel talks began early. Honors vocabulary masked logistics headaches. Roe's greenhouse name would echo in Washington parlors. Every capital trusted liars who spoke confidently. Confederate countryside watched for insurrection. Rumors magnified footfalls. Hogs and corn moved from smokehouses to commissary wagons. Enslaved laborers hauled both. Ordnance officers toured furnaces. Casting flaws killed gun crews later. Gray and blue blurred in smoke. Friendly fire etched caution into later orders. Men who wandered from battle lines faced courts-martial. Trauma lacked vocabulary. Paperwork trails show women arguing hardship. Some succeeded, most did not. Towns anticipated widows. Charity sermons mixed genuine care with social control. The Great Conscription fights lay ahead. Volunteering still filled most ranks in 1861. Some men collected enlistment bonuses and vanished. Provosts began cataloging tricks. Homesickness pulled men toward creek beds. Patrols rode with rope and reputation. State uniforms clashed. Generals swore at mixed equipment lists. German and Irish units carved identity from language and priestly blessing alike. The Union Navy enlisted African American seamen earlier than the Army welcomed black soldiers broadly. Policy lagged reality. Raider dreams and broken blockade schemes sailed on bravado until hulls met cruisers. Letters of marque tempted investors. International law made prizes expensive. Public buildings became wards. Chalkboards behind beds recorded fevers. Anesthesia helped when available. Many amputations relied on speed and grip. Teams learned to tag bodies. Anonymous mounds haunted later memorial movements. Dr. Holmes and others sold preservation to families who could pay freight north. Black crepe signaled communities in grief. Fashion mirrored politics. Parlor pianos played battle songs. Lyrics aged faster than melodies. Color lithographs simplified chaos into tableaus buyers could frame. Miniature wooden muskets rehearsed adulthood boys would meet too soon. Columns on roads meant theft, protection, or flight choices forced in hours. Labor control tightened where lines swayed. Escape maps hid in memory. Urban bondage's cash nexus wobbled when employers vanished to uniform. Meeting halls collected relief for refugees. Ministers linked prayer to politics. Peace Democrats gathered quietly. Later they would roar when casualties mounted. Men who cared little for abolition still chose union over dissolution. Some congressmen demanded harsher war measures long before emancipation proclamations. Seward, Chase, Wells, Cameron. Ambition and competence shared cramped rooms. Shipwrights hammered into night. Timber contracts smelled like money and pitch. Forms multiplied. Paymasters became targets of curses and congressional inquiry. Soldiers sang about wormy crackers. Commissaries learned logistics by scandal. Bad wells did more damage than enemy scouts in some weeks. Shelter halves became religion. Veterans remembered rain before bullets. Orchards and hen houses paid the tax of hungry columns. Lost orders turned victories into what-ifs. Horses died faster than telegraph poles rose. Ridges and fords named battles before generals agreed on titles. Heatstroke at Bull Run matched fear. Mud would rule later campaigns. Spring rains swelled crossings. Engineers earned pay on bad days. Virginia farms donated rails to fires. Armies left stubs where boundaries once stood. Drovers cursed dust. Stakes arrived as string if commissaries skimped. Guards shot at noises. Timbers burned mysteriously near both lines. Atlantic shores gained new eyes. Signal fires replaced tourism. Local knowledge became leverage. Courts tested loyalty oaths. Federal revenue cutters had new missions. Smugglers adapted routes. Suspicion widened. Some letters never arrived. Students became lieutenants. Professors volunteered as surgeons. Thorny syllogisms met amputations. Faith hardened or broke. Indian Territory and beyond would be pulled into wider war. Pressure built on every frontier. Far West wealth bought bonds. Distance delayed news. Coast still met by ship schedules. Continental union was idea as much as wire. Aristocrats leaned south sometimes. Workers leaned bread and peace. Napoleon III's court liked cotton and adventure. Diplomats weighed risk. Global fiber markets twitched. Substitutes never fully replaced Southern bales. Adventurers who once eyed Caribbean glory now marched closer to home. Elixirs promised strength. Soldiers learned skepticism. Fine print punished secessionists' creditors. Commerce rewrote itself. Heavy trains chewed spikes. Maintenance crews became combatants' lifelines. Foundries and steamboats painted skies. War industry tinted breath. Steamers slipped supplies. Picket boats listened for oars. Federal troops crossed into Virginia suburbs. Civilians learned new law.